During the war against the Wraith, the Ancients, desperate to find a way to counter them, created various types of powerful, large-scale weapons, with mixed results, leaning heavily toward failure. Although a few designed and built their own weapons in secret, the outcome remained the same. No matter the power or size, they weren't effective enough to make a difference, as the Wraith had vast numbers and could adapt to any threat. For this reason, they decided to focus on something smaller and more subtle. Many might think they would turn to biological weapons, but they never considered or attempted it, perhaps due to the trauma from what happened in the Milky Way, the risk of unintended consequences, or, worse, a mutation that could affect them, or even for moral reasons. Instead, they created microbots or nanites, designed to destroy the Wraith's biology. These nanites could assimilate organic tissue and self-replicate, with a level of aggression programmed into their code that surpassed even that of the Wraith, to ensure success. However, without warning, the nanites began to replicate and intertwine, evolving until they took on the only form they knew, that of their creators.
As I've already mentioned, their origin stems from the Ancients' desperation to find a solution to the Wraith threat, and the creation of nanites was one such attempt. However, after the nanites evolved and took on the appearance of the Ancients, or Lanteans, rather than ending the experiment, the Ancients chose to continue and see how they could still be of use. Subsequent experiments focused on testing their capabilities in warfare, maintaining their extreme aggression, even though the Replicators themselves did not want to be aggressive. Yes, the Replicators did not desire violence, but the Ancients had implemented additional subroutines to prevent them from ever turning against their creators. In the end, however, the scientists and the Atlantis Council determined that the experiment, besides being a failure, had strayed too far from its original concept. As a result, the project was shut down, but instead of simply deactivating it with the push of a button, they went for something far more drastic, straight out of Warhammer and Exterminators.
Alright, fire!
A massive Lantean war fleet was dispatched to wipe out the planet where the Asurans resided. Once the operation was complete, and believing they had eradicated all trace of the Asurans, they withdrew and deleted all records and data related to them, except for those concerning the nanobots, which were never used. They even erased the Stargate address to that world, likely to maintain appearances. The few Asurans who survived multiplied and rebuilt their civilization without interference from either the Ancients or the Wraith. After the war ended and the Wraith dominated the galaxy, the Asurans launched their own offensive against them. The Wraith, in their arrogance, believed they could once again rely on sheer numbers to secure victory, just as they had done against the Ancients, and they tried. But as the conflict progressed, the Wraith realized that this time, their strategy would not work. The Asuran offensives were practically unstoppable. Not only did they possess a massive technological advantage, they were also immune to Wraith weapons. Being machines, they could not be used as food. Furthermore, they were physically superior and, most importantly, they could match, if not surpass, the Wraith's production capacity for warships and troops. At the height of the conflict, Wraith ships were being destroyed by the hundreds or even thousands in under a week. While the Asurans remained unfazed by similar losses, they could replace their forces in no time. When the balance of power clearly shifted in favor of the Asurans and the Wraith realized they couldn't win using the same tactics as they had against the Ancients, they managed, through great effort and sacrifice, to capture and study the Replicators. They couldn't shut them down or make significant changes, but they developed a shutdown code that disabled the Replicators' directive to attack them, effectively ending the Asuran-Wraith war. After the war, all Asurans withdrew to their home world, where they isolated themselves and weren't heard from again for millennia. Even the Wraith avoided provoking them. Over the course of 10 millennia, the Asurans refined their technology, or rather, that of their creators, reaching remarkable levels of efficiency, especially in the military domain and in the rapid production of zero-point modules or ZPM. Although many might assume they all shared the same mindset, the truth is the Asurans were divided into two ideological factions: the isolationists, like Oberoth, who were content with maintaining the status quo, and the ascensionists, like Neum, or whatever we want to call them, who aspired to follow in their creators' footsteps and ascend to their level. Life for the Asurans was peaceful until the Atlantis expedition accidentally arrived on their planet. From that moment on, everything fell apart. The Atlantis expedition and the Asurans began diplomatic talks about zero-point modules and the possibility of collaborating against the Wraith. However, the negotiations soon turned into interrogations, and the Asurans discovered that the expedition members were descendants of the Ancients, and that the city of Atlantis remained intact. Enraged, the Asurans launched their own city ship, modeled after Atlantis, to destroy it in revenge. The Ascensionists intervened, helping the expedition disable the Asurans' rage programming and temporarily halting the attackers from the city ship, which was then destroyed. Everything seemed under control until Neum, having been reprogrammed by Oberoth, attacked Dr. Elizabeth Weir. He was expelled into space and eventually left inactive, drifting in orbit. Some time later, a group of Ancients, or Lanteans, were discovered traveling between the two galaxies. They were escorted back to Atlantis and reclaimed the city. When the Replicators attacked again, having found a way to override the code that prevented them from harming their creators, they discovered that living Ancients were present. They took their revenge, eliminating the Ancients and seizing control of Atlantis. However, their plans were foiled by the Atlantis team, who used an anti-replicator weapon to retake the city. Frustrated by two failed attempts to seize or destroy Atlantis, the Asurans began constructing a fleet of warships to strike at the heart of the problem, Earth. In response, the Daedalus-class ship Apollo devised a plan to destroy the Asuran war cruisers using its new weapon, Horizon, capable of deploying multiple nuclear warheads in a cluster strike. Later, the Asurans made a third attempt to destroy Atlantis using a Stargate satellite, firing a sustained energy beam through the Stargate directly at the city. All attempts to destroy the satellite failed. The Asurans nearly succeeded, but after 10 millennia, Atlantis once again lifted off, and while it wasn't the first time, this departure was final. During their journey, the Atlantis team traveled to the Asuran homeworld to steal multiple zero-point modules. They only managed to retrieve one, but in the process, they discovered that the directive to attack the Wraith had been deactivated. McKay reactivated it, but at the cost of losing Dr. Elizabeth Weir during the mission. With the directive restored, the Asuran war cruisers set course for Wraith planets, launching a new war between the Asurans and the Wraith. In a short time, the Asurans gained a decisive advantage. However, the Wraith began to offer stronger resistance, occasionally managing to counterattack. Even so, the Asurans' progress began to slow. Despite a convincing string of victories, the Asurans concluded that their progress was insufficient. After careful analysis, they identified a critical weakness in the Wraith, their dependence on humans as a food source. As a result, the Asurans developed a new tactic: eliminate human settlements to starve the Wraith into extinction. After the destruction of several human worlds and colonies, and with key intel provided by replicator clones of the Atlantis team, members of Neum's group, the Ascensionists, a coalition was formed to lay siege to the Asuran home world. The Wraith, with half a dozen hive ships, the Atlantis expedition, with several Daedalus-class ships, and the Travelers, with their own fleet and an Aurora-class ship, coordinated a joint plan. The first step was to destroy several Asuran Aurora-class warships, forcing the Asurans to retreat to their homeworld, where the final siege would begin. The plan was simple. McKay, with the help of his allied replicator, had to gather all the Asuran nanites into a single point, forming a massive swarm of nanites. Then, they would overload the zero-point modules or ZPM to trigger the planet's implosion. The plan worked. The planet was destroyed, and with it, all the Asurans. Or so they thought. A small group of Asurans, who were not under Oberoth's control, had anticipated the planet's destruction and the annihilation of their entire kind. They used the opportunity to continue with their own plans of ascension. This group, led by the replicator version of Dr. Elizabeth, or Asuran, honestly, I don't even know what to call her anymore, dedicated all their efforts to seeking ascension, without success. Eventually, they developed an artificial method. Their nanites were deactivated or destroyed, but their consciousness, their energy, was uploaded into subspace, staying as close as possible to the state of ascension. However, this state was not what they had hoped for. In fact, it became a living torture. With no bodies to return to, they wandered through the galaxy in search of a way to regain their physical forms. During their journey, they encountered numerous species unknown even to the Wraith. They even managed to infiltrate Wraith technology itself, though the experience disgusted them. With no other options to restore themselves physically, Elizabeth infiltrated Atlantis, seeking help to save herself and her group. They succeeded, but one of their own betrayed them. Elizabeth had no choice but to eliminate him. Once that issue was resolved, the group retreated to a remote world to continue their pursuit of ascension. However, Elizabeth, aware that sooner or later others in the group, or even she herself, could become a threat, decided to take drastic action. She led the group into a trap, redirecting the Stargate to an empty region of space where they all, including herself, would be left floating, frozen, and deactivated, marking the end of the Pegasus Replicators, or Asurans. Well, that was supposed to be the closure for the Pegasus Replicators. Although there were still plots about replicators on Earth, and even the storyline of Stargate Atlantis, Extinction, or Stargate Atlantis, Unascended, call it whatever you like, which was going to continue with the Asurans, Elizabeth, hybrids, and much more. But, as always, everything was cancelled. Damn you, MGM. Unlike their counterparts in the Milky Way or the Asgard galaxy, the Asurans are far more complex, even down to the level of each individual nanite. Being smaller at a cellular scale, they can adopt virtually any form or adapt much faster. Additionally, they can penetrate any obstacle, as long as there's the slightest crack, similar to the T-1000. Regarding their physical form, aside from adopting a human, or ancient, appearance, they can develop bodies so intricate that they even simulate a fully functional human biological system. However, this level of complexity makes them significantly more vulnerable. Although they might appear to function as a hive mind, or that they all shared the same ideology, the truth is that there were distinct ideological factions within them, though only two main ones. On one side were the isolationists, or resentful ones, who preferred to remain stuck in the past, repeating old patterns and maintaining the status quo. On the other side were the ascensionists, a small minority that sought to make peace with their creators, assist other species, and ascend to reach the level of the ancients. Unfortunately, Oberoth prevailed and seized total control over the Asurans. One of their key traits was their subspace communication network, which allowed them to send and receive real-time information about the actions of every individual. This system also enabled them to alter directives, mindsets, or even the personalities of all Asurans, provided someone accessed the source code or if the leader willed it, as had happened before. However, this connection could be voluntarily severed by any Asuran, though doing so carried the risk of not having an up-to-date backup in case of destruction. Another of their abilities was biological assimilation, allowing them to infect living beings, especially humans, to convert them into replicators or fully replace them. Lastly, they possessed the ability of mind probing, very similar to the replicators of the Milky Way, which suggests that both were created by the ancients, albeit for different purposes. Still, both projects ended in catastrophic results. As for their culture, there's not much to say. They merely imitated their creators on a superficial level, without truly embracing their philosophy. They didn't share their ideologies, only a generalized hatred towards all races, particularly the Tori, for being the ancients' favorites. It's curious, despite mimicking their creators' technology, the Asurans' tech turned out to be more outdated, and they never developed significant innovations of their own, or at least no major improvements. That's why I believe they wanted to seize the city of Atlantis, to study it, enhance their technology, or simply destroy it to eliminate any competition. What's even stranger is that, despite being highly advanced replicators, they lacked quality shields and didn't even possess drones, the most powerful weapon ever created by the ancients. The only known ships they had were a frigate, Asuran-class war cruisers, and their version of puddle jumpers. And that's why, in the next video, we'll be talking about the Stargate Pegasus Chronicles mod.
The Asurans were one of the most tragic enemies left behind by the ancients. Created solely to stop or combat the Wraith, Another failed creation of the ancients. The Asurans wanted to help their creators because that's how they were programmed, but when the ancients realized they didn't meet their expectations or that the project had spiraled out of control, they did what they always did best: erase everything and pretend it never existed. At this point, instead of appearing as wise or intelligent, the ancients seem more like a bunch of bastards with an endless list of crimes that others have to clean up. It would have been interesting to see the Ascensionists as a neutral faction, simply seeking peace, or even as allies of humanity. It seems that was the direction they intended to explore in future stories. But, as always, everything was cancelled. In the next Stargate video, we'll talk about ships. So now I ask you, what do you think about the Asurans and the Ancients? How would you use them? Or what would you do with them? Give it a like, subscribe, comment, so YouTube's algorithm recommends us to more people, and I'll see you in the next video.